We've had this debate throughout the week talking about, yes, 4 of the Mag 7 stocks reporting in the remainder of the week. We, of course, have everything that's happening geopolitically. The president now making his way to Iowa to talk about affordability ahead of the midterms. And then, of course, Jay Powell kicking off that 2-day policy meeting in Washington, D.C. today. What matters this week to you?
I think you've really gone through them in the lead up to me just listening. We have wobbles out of Washington to see what happens politically. That's obviously a big wild card always. We have earnings and the fact that we have for the whatever you call Mag 7, AI 10, super meaningful. In addition, this week is 35% of the market cap. Addition to those companies. And the Fed meeting, although I think that's probably the least impactful, given that, there's very little expectation of a rate cut, and Chairman Powell is stuck between a rock and a hard place right now. So it is very unlikely that he says anything that's market moving.
Alli, I do think about how much we are hearing a little bit of a drumbeat when it comes to geopolitical, and not a surprise considering how we kicked off 2026 with the U.S. going into Venezuela, taking out, I should say, President Maduro. And I just, Jamie Dimon has kind of highlighted that area. David Solomon, we just heard from our team over in Europe, Stephen Engel. What about global issues? How does that factor into how you're thinking about U.S. markets, U.S. names, and maybe where investors should be positioning?
That is such a macro question, right? So,
yes.
Our CIO published a monthly report, and it's called "Nostalgia is Not an Investment Strategy." And, the paradigm has simply shifted globally. And what that means is that the world has to evolve, and there are all of these impactful ways that it evolves, whether it's the dollar, whether it's increases in defense spending, whether it's a hangover from the pandemic, which is owning and monitoring your own supply chain. So it all matters. However, if you think back a year, we're almost before, trade day, think about how long the markets were in a panic because of that, relative to Greenland and Venezuela. So I think there is a growing comfort with this president and his and the Don Rowe doctrine. And there's a growing understanding that the paradigm has shifted going forward, and that geopolitics will be a risk going forward in a way that it was not. And so everything that was said before makes absolute sense, and I think increases the need, whether you're a U.S. investor or a non-U.S. investor, to be diversified.
But just on this, with Greenland and versus Venezuela, I think a lot of people were surprised about what happened in Venezuela, and then the president last week essentially walking back comments about acquiring Greenland in some sort of way. When it comes to geopolitics, does the market take him seriously? Does the market take him literally? Because he's kept people guessing. Let's just say that.
I heard, I think it was David Solomon say something about the noise. And you asked me last time when I was on, do I make investment decisions on this? And the answer was not in the short term, but yes, in the changes in the long term. And so I think the answer to that is twofold. The first is that this president has a style where he often, breaks things first and mediates things back. And the market seems to be understanding that, as well as you pointed out, his desire to have more liquidity in the market to keep rates down, addressing the affordability concept, and voters who are very concerned about that before the midterm election, and wanting the markets to go up. And so the second thing is that, you have to really, most geopolitical issues tend to be noise in the short term, and they don't affect buying behavior in the long term. In the long term, you look to fundamentals. I do think with this presidency and the magnitude of the changes and the disaggregation of the way the world functions politically and from a defense and alliance perspective, there are some longer term issues and things. For example, the peace dividend that existed after the Cold War, and the fact that, we have representatives all over the world that are spending much more money on defense, and defense is now not just physical defense, it's cyber defense. So there are some real long-term investment themes here.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's about, what can actually be done. What are the long-term implications of some of the fundamental fiscal packages and legislative packages? And so, again, this week in earnings is going to be meaningful given the market cap and the AI adjacent names we have reporting.
Hey, one thing I want to ask you before you go, Alli, we're looking at health insurers, which are coming under pressure. The Trump administration proposing limiting federal payments to Medicare Advantage plans next year. So we're looking at Humana and United Health and CVS Health really dragged down. We saw this in the aftermarket when it first hit last night. Do you look at this like a wait and see moment? Is it an opportunity to get a name that is now maybe 18 or 20% lower because you still believe in that we're going to need healthcare for more of an aging population? I'm just curious what your thought is, and forgive me, just about 20 seconds.
No, I think that's a great question, and you're right from a thematic and from the population perspective, it makes sense. It's a lot of these get killed. If you want to buy them, you buy them.
Okay.
If it doesn't make sense long term, then you wait and get more information.